Thank you, Donna. Good evening. So, as we continue on our journey of walking with our shadows, this week we get to endeavor in walking with the shadows of our past. And to join us on this journey, we will be cultivating immeasurable compassion. And just a recap for those of you who weren't here last week, during the month of March, I will be giving a series of talks on walking with our shadows, and we'll be using the Buddhist teachings of the Four Immeasurables to support us on that journey. And last week, just to recap, we discussed that the shadows are a term that was coined by Carl Jung to describe that unconscious part of our personality that we can only really recognize through our projections and reflections from others. And Carl Jung said that no one can become conscious of the shadows without considerable moral effort, which is what I think we're all doing here this evening. He says that to become conscious of the shadows involves recognizing the dark aspects of our personality as present and real. One does not become enlightened by imagining images of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And we, in the science of mind philosophy that we study here, we recognize each life as whole and as complete and as perfect expressions of a divine intelligence. And so with that, we get to explore the parts of us that we can't really see very clearly. And we call those the shadows. And so in exploring those, we get to see more of the facets that make us whole. And so while I was researching and discovering this shadow concept, I came across this Times Magazine article. It's by an Episcopal priest named Barbara Brown, and I'd just like to share an excerpt with you because it's really good. It's titled, "In Praise of Darkness." Darkness is shorthand for anything that scares me, anything that I want no part of, either because I'm sure that I do not have the resources to survive it, or because I do not want to find out. The absence of fear is there, along with the fear of dementia and the loss of those nearest to me. So is the melting of the polar ice caps and the suffering of children, and that nagging question of what it feels like to die. If I had my way, I would eliminate everything from chronic back pain to the fear of the devil from my life and from the lives of those I love. If I could just find the right nightlight to keep on. At least I think I would. The problem is this, that when, despite all my best efforts, the light has gone off in my life, plunging me into the kind of darkness that turns my knees to water, nonetheless, I have not died. The monsters have not dragged me out of bed and taken me to their lair. The witches have not turned me into a bat. Instead, I've learned things in the darkness that I could never have learned in the light. Things that have saved my life over and over again. So that there is really only one logical conclusion. I need the darkness as much as I need the light. And when I found this and I read this, I felt like it really speaked to what we're talking about this evening, walking with the shadows of our past, because there are things that we are each holding on to, things that we're scared of, things that we've done or labels that we've imposed on ourselves, ways that we've acted or thought that we just assume never see the light of day. And yet, I'll speak for myself, despite my best efforts, no matter how good my prayer is, or how positive my thinking is, or how long I meditate, those parts of me that I push aside and choose not to look at still find a way to be present in my life. And so as I became more and more curious about what these shadows are and how they show up in our life, another really important point for me to understand was, how do we obtain them? How do we get these shadows? How do we accumulate them? And one of the main areas is through our childhood. Unintentionally, our parents or our teachers or those people who loved us were living in fear of failure, fear of intimacy, all sorts of fears. And they unintentionally, unconsciously impose those fears on us. Whether they told us to just be quiet and sit still, or hush up, I'll hear you later, or maybe they just were an example. And I can remember as a child seeing adults who would maybe not speak up for themselves when they should have, or would go the long way around instead of confronting someone. Or I remember one adult who would completely detach and distance themselves from the people they loved because they were so scared of disappointment. And what I realize now, in looking back at these behaviors and then recognizing those same behaviors and fears in myself, is that sometimes our shadows are a part of a fear that has been around for much longer than we have. And in Living the Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes writes that the signposts on the road to fear are too numerous to mention, but each leaves its imprint upon the growing mind and the plastic memory of the child. It's no wonder that he arrives at maturity in a state of perpetual fear. And this is not to say that all of our shadows, all of our fears come from our childhood, but it's just a good place to start looking. Recognizing where our fears come from is not a matter of placing blame. It's not an excuse for our actions today, but it is a stepping stone on the journey of transforming those fears and bringing those shadows into the light. And when we are able to start seeing our own fears and seeing them in others, seeing our own darkness and seeing it in others, it activates this spiritual practice which we will be cultivating this evening. It activates compassion because we no longer need to have judgment or condemnation for others. When we can feel what they feel, we can have compassion. And compassion becomes a healing balm for these shadows. And I'd like to share with you a personal experience of walking with the shadows of my past that I had. It was about 3 months long, actually. And looking back on it, I can see this beautiful dance of light and shadows and light and shadows. But while I was in it, it felt like more of like a mosh pit. You know what a mosh pit is? And so I'm in ministerial school, and I happen to be one of the youngest students in my ministerial school right now. And so back in November, I was asked to be on a panel for young adult emerging leaders in our movement, in our faith, at the annual Centers for Spiritual Living Convention. And at this convention, there's ministers and leaders from all different centers all over the world, and they come together and they learn stuff and teach stuff and talk shop, and there's business meetings and all sorts of stuff. And so I was so thrilled and so excited to get this opportunity. And I knew that there would be ministers there who I've looked up to and who are now like, kind of celebrities in my eyes. And so this was big time for me. Ever since I accepted the call to ministry, I've also felt this great pull and push inside me to support our organization as a whole in its movement. And so there were so many different good things going on in this one invitation. But like I said, I was invited in November, and the convention wasn't until February. So during these 3 months, probably every fear or feeling of inadequacy, of shame, of being a failure, of not being good enough, made itself clear and present in my world. And to be honest, I had no idea at the length of my shadows or at how big and powerful they were. And I remember saying to myself, of course, I didn't have compassion for my thoughts and my feelings. I would yell at myself when I would hear myself say, well, gosh, Nicole, Why are you still having these fears of not being good enough, of not being accepted? How in the world can you go from 1 minute feeling and with conviction knowing that you are an expression of divine life, and the next minute feeling like you're not good enough and you're ashamed of yourself? Where is this coming from, and why are you tainting this good thing with this fear and anxiety? I don't know about if any of you can relate to this, but I have this really old tape that sometimes likes to replay itself, and it says, if they really knew me, then they wouldn't like me, or they wouldn't accept me, or. See, I think that what happened is I imposed labels on myself. I think we all impose labels on ourselves that either categorize us or protect us or put us in a little group. Personally, labels that I've used were, I'm a dropout, I'm a teenage parent, I'm a failure, I'm an alcoholic, I'm just not good enough. And it's not, I realized that until we were able to let these labels fall off and make room for something new to come in, we are going to unconsciously keep acting out the fulfillment of these labels. And it's not conscious. That's why it's a shadow. And Marianne Williamson said that it takes courage to endure the sharp pains of self-discovery instead of the dull pain of unconsciousness that would last a lifetime. And you know what? I happen to agree with her. So I endured the sharp pains of my darkness, and I stopped trying to make it go away. I instead embraced that this is part of me. I am a paradox of confidence and self-doubt, of poise and anxiety. And when it was time for me to experience this panel and be in front of all of these people that I admired, I brought that paradox with me. At one point, I was ready to walk off stage in front of everyone because I was so scared that I could not do this. I thought I was going to die. And then when they handed me the mic and it was my turn to share my thoughts, I was confident, I was poised, and I knew that that was where I needed to be. And so it's not always easy walking with the shadows of our past. Sometimes it's really painful. But thank God we live in a spiritual universe where we get to practice these spiritual lives that we're living. And with practice and practice and practice, it becomes easier and it becomes less painful until one day we can look back and we can see that spans of time have gone by when we felt good about ourselves, when we were proud of ourselves, when our head was held high and we loved ourselves. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in walking with these shadows of our past, it's so important that we aren't mean or cruel or hurtful to ourselves or others, but that we can cultivate compassion to support us. The Buddhist Four Immeasurables comes from people were asking the Buddha, what can we do? How can we live our lives? And he said, the way to live your life morally and ethically upright is to cultivate the practice of immeasurable loving kindness, of immeasurable joy, of immeasurable compassion, and immeasurable equanimity. And the immeasurable part is that we express and share these ideas, this love and compassion with an immeasurable amount of people. And the good that is generated and produced from this becomes immeasurable. And so in our journey of walking with the shadows of our past, as I said, the most important practice that could accompany us is compassion. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for those who shared their fear with us when we were younger, or those who share their fear with us now. And compassion for all beings. We all carry hurts, disappointments, regrets, things that we wish that we didn't have to hold on to. And when we can bring compassion to ourselves and to someone else, it brings a warm, glowing light to those shadows. And so now I would like to invite you into an experience of shining the light of compassion on fear. And so if you'd like, I'd like to invite you to just sit back comfortably in your seats, allowing the support of the seat to represent the support of the divine, as it is always there holding us up. And I invite you to bring your awareness to the way your body feels. Just breathing into this moment. As thoughts come and go, just be present to them and release them on their way. And I invite you to acknowledge something from your past that you still feel yourself struggling with. Just be aware. What does it feel like? What does it look like? Where is it coming from? Is there a fear we can link to this struggle? Now I invite us to recognize the presence of a divine wisdom within us. This wisdom within sees all things, knows all things, and it is who we really are. This presence within us has great compassion for our fears, for our doubts, for our humanness. This is our light, and it shines its truth on all that we allow ourselves to see. We may now invite this wisdom to shine its light of compassion on our fears. Just allowing it to be saturated with immeasurable compassion. Allow ourselves to be saturated with immeasurable compassion. When we have compassion for ourselves, we can start to share compassion with others. I invite you now to think of one person you would like to share your light of immeasurable compassion with. And in a symbol of this sharing, I invite you, if you'd like, to walk up here and light a candle for them. This candle represents the openness of our hearts to spreading the light of acceptance, inclusion, and compassion for all beings of life. And so I now declare that the light of compassion is shining its warmth and clarity on each and every one of us here. And then on the ones that we light our candles for. And that light is now spreading and touching all those around us. It's rippling through our city of Seal Beach. It's making its way up and down California. And it's spreading out across America. Our compassion is now expanding through the countries that touch us, through the water, to all countries, to all places of life. All of the earth is now covered with the warmth of our compassion. We are glorified in the name of love, and all of humanity is exalted with the light of compassion. We are one. I am so very grateful. And so it is. And so I'd just like to offer you, I made these little pamphlets for you to take home for your spiritual practice of compassion, of cultivating compassion. And so Tina's going to pass those out, and it's pretty self-explanatory, and that's all. Thank you, guys.
Wow.